I better move on, otherwise I'll get into terrible trouble going down that line. Right then, moving on to item 9. Now then, you won't find item 9 in your agenda, members. That's because the paper on the A428 Camborne to Cambridge scheme has been withdrawn from the agenda. That is as requested by the Mayor's interim transport statement, and that statement was agreed by the Combined Authority at a meeting on the 30th of May, and in deference to that declaration, we have decided to postpone that item until the October meeting. So, moving on to item 10, Milton Road, and we're starting off with quite a lot of public questions. So I'll call them to the table in the following order. Anne Hamill, Nick Flynn won't be here, but he'll get a written answer. Eric de Visser, he isn't here either, but I might read out his question. Then Michael Page, then Barbara Taylor, then Maureen May. They will be followed by the chairman of the Milton Road Local Liaison Forum, Councillor Scott, and then we'll hear from the officer, then we'll have our debate, and so on. So, if I could invite Anne Hamill to come to the table, please. And you have 3 minutes, starting when you're comfortable.
Press the button.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Today, the Joint Assembly will be considering the preferred option preliminary design for Milton Road, with a view either to approving it or to recommending modifications prior to this design going before the Executive Board on 29th of June. After that, the next stage is to be public consultation in the autumn based on the outcome of the Executive Board's decision. However, 2 of the key objectives set down in the paper accompanying this agenda item are at 2.1, increase bus patronage and new services, and F, maintain or reduce general traffic levels. Focusing on the first point, increased bus patronage and introducing new services will require more bus drivers. Current bus services, especially for Carpen, are regularly affected by the lack of bus drivers, reducing the service available to current bus users. And housing costs in Cambridge are high and likely to be beyond bus drivers' salaries. Focusing on the second point, what hasn't been addressed to date is how congestion will be tackled by either the GCP or by the Combined Authority, led by the Mayor for Cambridge and Peterborough, which has come into existence since City Deal was set up, and has an impact on the GCP's broad proposals. If there is to be a metro system, then Milton Road could be little used by public transport, as the metro would go underground at the Science Park. So my question's in 2 parts. How can the design plans for Milton Road be finalised if we don't know what measures will be taken to tackle congestion by either the GCP or the Combined Authority? And where are the drivers for an increased bus service to be found?
Thank you very much. We don't have Mr. Flynn with us, so I'm going to take his question as read, and he will be getting a response as in the usual way. Mr. De Visser is not here, I don't think, but he has requested his question to be read out, so I hope you can all hear me. Regarding your plans for Milton Road, please allow me, as one of its residents for 32 years, to propose some improvements. Living opposite Kendall Way, I cycle to work every day, inbound on the Milton Road bus lane. Second point, bidirectional cycling on Milton Road's north side is haphazard and occasionally dangerous. Cyclists in both directions very often go much too fast. Too many people are supposed to travel in safety whilst going in opposite directions. On Milton Road, pedestrians are merely separated by a slightly raised line running along the length of the path. Next point, cycleways in Holland are laid in the direction of traffic. That's why I cross Milton Road to cycle along the bus lane. Please abolish the idea to have a shared space path for pedestrians and cyclists on Milton Road's north side. It is wrong and dangerous. A shared path running parallel to it will only increase disorder. How do cyclists overtake one another? This is already awkward now, and the pavement is often used for it. A shared path will exacerbate matters. And why would one use the latter if an inbound cycle lane will be laid out? Next point. You need more crossings where cyclists of all ages can safely cross Milton Road, especially one near Downham's Lane. The southbound bus lane between Elizabeth Way and Mitcham's Corner is very rarely used and should be abolished. Bus lanes should be much shorter and only laid on the approaches to junctions, say 50 metres. All plans should adhere, as in Holland, to 3 priorities: pedestrians first, cycling second, public transport third. A shared path puts pedestrians in danger. It is likely that bus lanes could become redundant if a metro system is built running from the Science Park to the city centre. Therefore, must bus lanes still be seen as the favoured panacea to gridlock? Thank you, Mr. De Vista. Next questioner is Michael Page.
Thank you. I would like to invite Assembly members to imagine a vision of Milton Road, an impressive tree-lined gateway into Cambridge with high-quality footpaths and cycle paths, and electric buses gliding along a smooth roadway free of potholes, a pollution-free street built for people to travel via a variety of modes in safety and to enjoy their newly landscaped environment. But are we going to allow this vision to be spoiled by vehicles driving over and ruining the new grass verges and damaging the newly planted trees? So my question is, will Assembly members please recommend to the Executive Board that plans are put in place for a traffic regulation order banning verge parking along the whole length of the road, please? Now, this type of measure is not new. It's been used and enforced successfully elsewhere in North Cambridge, but it takes a long time to get a TRO approved and implemented. So I think it's far better to get it onto the agenda now as a preventative measure rather than waiting until after damage is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Mr. Blake will be picking that up when he comes to speak shortly. And the next question is from Barbara Taylor.
My question refers to. Is it going to work? Oh, okay. My question refers to the diagram after page 32, sheet 2. Right. My question is about the crossings on Milton Road, which were used by a large number of local residents. This crossing was also highlighted in our LLF workshops by the residents. Unless the crossings work for local people who walk and cycle, it will become a road engineered solution in favour of those travelling by car. The stretch between Ardbury Road and Uni Lane is just after Fraser Road on the Milton Road is extremely long, and residents using Downham's Lane, that's a lot of people coming from the Woodhead Drive area. There's also a cut through from Ardbury, and of course we've got to, not forgetting all the school children and students, will need to cross there. And of course the pedestrians will need to access the bus stops for the buses that do occasionally stop down Milton Road on both sides of the road. So it's very important we have a crossing there. There are lots of journeys involving crossing the Milton Road. Journeys by cycle will be safer if made with direction of traffic instead of bi-directionally. Given that cyclists will be passing each other on the right hand sides and share space with pedestrians, will seriously confuse everyone. The City Deal's original remit was for better walking, cycling and bus journeys. Please could you ensure that this crossing at Downham's Lane is put in to enable better cycling and walking? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Maureen Mace.
My question that's written down in your booklet has been shortened, and because it's full of numbers, I don't think it makes much sense, so I would like to explain it. When council added the bus lanes about 25 years ago, they decided to share them with cyclists. These days, there are far more cyclists, and the only buses that venture into the bus lanes are the ones that stop at a bus stop, i.e. number 9, or those that undertake at junctions. There is also more traffic going to the science and business parks than into the city at peak time in the morning. Recently, cars have been parking in the bus lanes between Gilbert Road and Richmond's Corner. This is despite double yellow lines, and neither cyclists nor buses can use them. Milton Road residents have asked for better and safer walking first, cycling second, and public transport third. The officers and our councillors have listened, and the plans are very much better, but we still have a dangerous precedent where cyclists and pedestrians have an illogically shared space on the northwest side of the road. Andy Campbell of Stagecoach has said that there does not need to be a long bus lane stretching from Kendall Way to Aubrey Road. If all the bus lanes are shortened and priority is given at traffic lights with smart, whatever it is, the remaining space can be used to improve the conflict of pedestrians and cyclists on the northwest side of Milton Road. The GCP's aim is also to encourage more walking, cycling and to use public transport, whether it is by bus, metro or rail. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that long bus lanes make bus journeys quicker. It's just an assumption, and in fact some cities have taken away their bus lanes. With these plans, cars will have a wonderful time on a clear road, so that there is no incentive for change. So my original question was and still is, why do we need even longer bus lanes when they are not used now?
Thank you very much. And at this point, I will invite Councillor Scott, the chairman. Yes, there you are. I couldn't see you, see. I thought you were hiding. Right. She is the chairman of the of the Milton Road Local Liaison Forum. Now, Jocelyn, you're a very articulate lady. I really enjoy listening to all your asides and everything. And I know you have no time limit. But if I could ask you to be as succinct as possible, I'd be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. May I just begin with a very slight comment?
Please.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
The big one in the
Middle one.
Thank you. I just have to begin. You beautifully called me chair, and it removed my opportunity to make a comment that as it's 100 years since some women got the vote, I was going to make the point that I'm not a chairman, but you've already picked the issue up, so thank you.
Yes, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. I fell into that trap. I'm glad I rescued myself before receiving a lecture from you. Thank you.
No, never a lecture. May I just begin by saying this, that generally speaking, the Local Liaison Forum for Milton Road is pleased with the plans that are coming forward. And it's really unsurprising that we are, in that I pay tribute to the residents' associations, to the residents themselves, to Cam Cycle, and to everybody who put so much effort into drawing us back from a precipice that was confronting us originally with the original plans. And I do pay tribute to the officers, particularly Paul van den Bulk, and to the consultants for all the work that they've done in ensuring that I can sit here and say that generally speaking there is appreciation for what is going forward. But as you will have realised from the questions that have been put, there are still some concerns on the part of the local liaison forum being expressed through what residents are saying. And I'd just like to emphasise very briefly some of those. The issue of crossings arose at the recent local liaison forum, and it's been re-expressed here. The wish for a crossing at Downham's Lane. There was also an issue about the Westbrook Centre and whether there could be a crossing there. We're not advocating those, may I say, but simply saying, could attention be paid, and particularly to those two issues, because as Barbara Taylor and Mr Visser mentioned, attention has to be paid to where the residents actually live and where there will be a need for crossings. The issue of bus lanes is still something that's been raised before and is being raised now in terms of the length, so that in the consultation that will certainly arise. The issue of floating bus stops hasn't been raised here, but I do raise it because the Deputy Chair of the Local Liaison Forum, Councillor Bird, has particularly raised this in the context of persons with a disability and also people who are elderly and the concerns that they do have with these floating bus stops. I just wish that they were called something else too. There's the issue of positioning of the bus stops, and the one at Union Lane has been mentioned. There's the issue of buses stopping, or may I say failing to stop. Mr Campbell was at the last local liaison forum and did make the point that the N bus, as it's called, will be stopping more frequently along there. And although I know that we're on Milton Road, not Histon Road, there has also been a request to Mr Campbell to stop the B bus, which comes along Histon Road and floats all along to Shire Hall, and could there be some attention paid there? I simply raise that here. I know it's Histon Road, not Milton Road, but both projects do work together effectively, and we are dependent on Mr Campbell for paying attention being paid to the residents along both those roads and their needs in terms of coming into and out of the city. There's also been mentioned the issue of vergers and the protection of them that's important, and this too raises the question of residents parking, and there will need to be some good liaison between councillors in the area in terms of addressing this issue of residents parking, because residents parking will no longer exist along Milton Road, and we're hoping to work together with the Greater Cambridge Partnership officers on that. I simply wish to conclude by saying this. Generally, there is appreciation for this plan, number one. Number two, we also see the consultation period as a period that really must be an effective consultation. We do not want a consultation that's a consultation when you pretend that you're having one. It's got to be a genuine consultation so that these issues that I've raised here, that the questioners have raised, and other issues that will be raised in the consultation, we hope they will be taken into account properly. That's number one. And number two is this, that the reason I believe that the Milton Road project has worked in the way it has is because there has been a real recognition of the importance of consultation with residents, with the people who live in the area. And also we've had the advantage of having on our local liaison forum, number one, the residents' associations represented. Number two, we've had both city and county councillors working together. Number three, there's been actually very good input from city and county councillors because of the boundary changes, which meant that we brought in the councillor from Castle, because it's now Milton Road back in Castle. We've got King's Hedges, we've got Chesterton and Arbury, in terms of county divisions, and we've got all those areas of King's Hedges, East and West Chesterton represented by city councillors, and very importantly we've had Milton District Council represented by a councillor from there who is now a county councillor from that area as well. And that's why I think it's worked very effectively, and I would put in this plea that future local liaison forums pay attention, and the projects pay attention to the way that the Milton Road project has worked, because it has worked in the way that it has, because of the readiness of the residents to come forward in the way that they did, and then also the cooperation from the Greater Cambridge Partnership officers, and that's been why we've managed to, I think, bring forward a plan that is something that's workable, and we hope, as I've said, that in the consultation period, these other issues that are being raised will be paid attention to. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really heartening to hear all that. I hope other members appreciated what lay behind all those very positive statements. I hope you all share the appreciation of all the people.
I just hope that the people behind me are
right.
equally
In case you weren't able to hear what the chair was saying, she was particularly grateful to the involvement of residents in the local liaison forum, and then she also said how good it was that the city and county council representatives for a wide range of areas touching Milton Road had effective participation too. Did I get that right? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right then. That was for you, Jocelyn, not for me. Right then. Okay. Right then. Right. So that leads me on to inviting Mr. Blake to present the report and address some of those questions.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say a few words by introduction in terms of the report and pick up on some of the questions that were raised. This, in a sense, follows the last report. This is a short term, delivering some shorter term improvements. It is what you'd probably describe as seeking an optimal scheme, because what we're trying to do is balance the various different modes. We are seeking, and I think we do deliver improvements in walking, cycling and public transport. So what we are doing is we are looking to raise this sort of urban environment. We're seeking to prioritise modes other than the private car. I think paragraphs lay out the sort of key changes, which I don't want to go through in detail, around the junctions. I know the particular question around Downham's Lane junction that has been raised today was raised in the liaison forum previously, and we've agreed to take that away and see whether we can put an additional crossing in there, and that technical work continues. I think the important point was raised of the impact on residents' parking in the area. So again, being straightforward and upfront to deliver some of the improvements around walking, cycling and public transport, then residents' parking will have to be removed from the area. That will be part of the consultation going forward. In terms of the suggestion around traffic regulation order, clearly that has merit. And I think if the Joint Assembly were minded, they could well request that is considered as part of the consultation process, so Assembly members may want to reflect on that. And I think finally for me, just to reiterate the issue around the bus lanes, actually the existing bus lane is getting reduced in size to reduce a blockage at one of the junctions. The additional bus lanes are going in on the outward bound side to deliver benefits to the public transport users along the corridor. This is designed to improve public transport and bus services as soon as we reasonably can, and that when a metro system comes along, I think as we've said previously, bus services will still be required across our area because of the scale of public transport intervention required. I'll leave it there, Chairman. I hope I've answered all the questions.
Okay, and just before we go to Assembly members, we have Councillor Bates with us, the Executive Board member for Transport. Do you have anything particularly you'd like to add to what's been said so far?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to pay thanks to Councillor Scott. I did attend the last meeting and heard a lot of what has been said today at that meeting, and I think Peter Blake has just reflected that as well. I think the one I didn't hear, by the way, and I did write it down, was about the parking on the grass and TPO. But everything else I think was picked up at the last liaison forum.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. For the last year, as chair of this assembly, I withdrew from being part of the Milton Road LLF because I'm a ward councillor there, so it's part of my area, and I felt that the chair of the assembly needed to be not part of that body. But I attended and I sort of sat and listened and observed members of the public and everybody that Jocelyn has talked about. They've done an absolutely fantastic job. I remember the very first meeting held to present the original plans for Milton Road, a public meeting, one of the most hostile meetings I think I've ever been in. And it's credit to everybody involved that we've gone from that level of hostility to plans to the position that we now find ourselves at. I wanted to just touch on a couple of things, one of which was as a result of Michael Page's question about a TRO to prevent verge parking. He mentioned that they have been successful elsewhere. They have been successful in King's Hedges. We have 3. He's right, they do take quite a long time for some reason to get implemented, but once implemented, they are incredibly successful. A TRO was applied for this year for Milton Road by Councillor Moschini, King's Hedges ward councillor, but unfortunately that was unsuccessful. I'm minded, having heard what Peter Blake has said, that I think it should be part of the plans and the proposals that go forward for Milton Road, so it can be all be done at the same time, and then when the road is finished and it's in proper use, there will be no parking on those verges, because it does make a difference. No, I think that probably covers it, because I've mentioned what Jocelyn said, and Maureen Mace, of course, has said pretty much what I said there about how the plans are better now than they were originally conceived, and it has been a very, very good LLF to A, be part of, and then B, to observe, and I'm assuming now I go back to being part of at some point.
Yeah, I think we can take it as a microcosm of how the Greater Cambridge Partnership has transformed itself in recent years. Councillor Vick.
Chair, I am listening to this as a non-participant in the local liaison forum, and I am picking up from the public questioners a recurrent theme about crossing points along the road, and I'm not going to be specific because I'm not able to, but I think there is a concern twofold really. One, that the absence of sufficient crossing points does have the effect of exaggerating the sort of slicing of the community around the road, and secondly, that it doesn't provide perhaps for enough points at which cyclists can cross and use the directional cycle lanes that are in the design. And I think that we obviously have in Cambridge a lot of dual use, shared use cycling and walking areas, and they can meet a real need, especially where we haven't been able to find the space or the infrastructure to design something differently, and there are many places where those constraints are really difficult to get around. But where we're doing a design like we are with this scheme, it seems a pity that we're designing in dual use cycling, as I think is the case along a large part of the northern side of Milton Road. And as I understand it, part of the reason for that is that it's difficult for cyclists accessing the road to cross in order to go the right way with the right cycle lane. And I've always had the view about this scheme that in strategic terms it's not the game changer in terms of public transport. I think there is some marginal improvements going to be secured, I think we're only going to get onto the game-changing bit with public transport when we talk about demand management and talk about the CAM Metro. But it does seem that this has the most potential to do most for cyclists and pedestrians, and it's just a shame that it doesn't quite appear to be doing it in this respect of crossings and then forcing the shared use need along long stretches. So I wonder, is there a way that this can be addressed before this goes out to consultation? Are there options that officers can still look at with the board to try and address some of these concerns?
We'll invite Mr Blake to pick up that question shortly. Councillor Massey.
So on point 3.14, it says that cyclists using the shared pavements to travel inbound will not have priority and will be required to give way to pedestrians. Well, how will that be managed? So in every shared use path that either the cycle or indeed walk tool, it's certainly the cyclists that appear to have the right of way. Certainly that's the way it feels.
I've never met an ill-mannered cyclist in my entire life, and how awful of them. Yeah, it's terrible. Right, so Mr Blake, sorry, could you pick up some of those points?
So in terms of, I think I said by, so you switch the mic on. I said by way of introduction that this was an optimal scheme and we were trying to balance a variety of things. If it's the will of the Assembly, we can go and look again. What I would say is, though, emphasising the length of time of the gestation period, the consultation with the liaison firm that's taken place to date, there's an awful lot of work that's got us to this point. We can clearly give more priority to one mode. There's an impact on the other modes, and what we've been trying to do is to best manage that. We will take that away in terms of in advance of the board, but I would emphasise the work that's been done to date, and there will not be a magic solution that we come forward with where everybody will be saying this does exactly what we want because of the space constraints and the movement requirements along that corridor.
And about how cyclists are going to give way to pedestrians, I mean, the image I have in my mind is those pavement signs saying respect, you know, and I sometimes wonder how much cyclists pay attention to that request, but are you able to give Councillor Bassey any assurance as to how the giving way to pedestrians is going to be managed?
Assurance is an interesting choice of word. I mean, the reality is that all road users and highway users have a responsibility to respect others. Because if they didn't, the system simply wouldn't work. We'd be having barriers everywhere, which I think was where we got to in the sort of the end of the 80s and 90s, where we barriered things out. We took massive amounts of land take, and actually we created an incredibly ugly urban environment. And what happened and what experience has taught us is that people and cyclists and public transport, there's an interaction across that system, and the vast majority of people are respectful across modes, and we will do what we can to support that. But we would hope that that's what happens in this particular instance.
Yes, speaking personally, I quite like shared space, but I know CamCycle is very much dislikes it and is much keener on segregated cycleways, and there is a very strong argument, I accept, that segregated cycleways encourage less confident users onto their bicycles, so let's not go there right now. Councillor Price raised the suggestion that we should add the traffic regulation order into our what we pass on to the board. Do other members agree with that? Well, shall I ask it the other way around? Does anyone not want the traffic regulation order possibility to be taken up and explored further?
Go on that day.
Your clout has won over, Councillor Price. Well, look, I got the impression that there was general board agreement with the paper there, and and we pass it on to the executive board accordingly. So thank you very much for that session. And particular thanks to residents, those who came to ask questions, and to the chair of the Local Liaison Forum. That was all very much appreciated. Thank you. Right, that takes us on to the city access paper. Don't have any public questions on this one. Yeah, just wait.
Thank you, Chair. In many respects, this relates to the sort of first item we had on public transport. In terms of, if on one hand we're looking at developing the public transport offer that in and of itself is attractive enough to encourage people to get out of their cars and use public transport. The other side, if we had a sort of carrot on one side, the other side may well be more of a stick in terms of what would we need to do to actively discourage, what options do we have, and really what impact would the various options have within the context of Greater Cambridge. And so what this paper just tries to outline, and just to emphasise, this is work in progress because it is not complete. It's not complete in terms of the technical evaluation, and what is critically important taking this forward in any way, shape or form will be the ideas of phasing and sequencing and understanding what the impact would be on communities and businesses as we continue with this conversation. So the graph you've seen before in terms of the impact on the traffic numbers, but essentially what the paper tries to do is to say there are principally a number of forms that form some form of demand constraint, some form of demand management may take. The first form may well be a physical constraint. You close a road, or you close it at certain times of day, or you close it to certain types of vehicles. And again, quite candidly, the paper says we are still working on those options. I think the challenge around road closures and closing parts of the city, for example, would be what really is the impact on traffic and what really is what is displaced. So simply you're moving traffic around, and we need to understand that in greater detail. What the paper's got a little bit more information around some of the options on fiscal constraint. So focusing very much on charging for car parking. If there was an increase in car parking charges on an hourly basis, what would the impact of that be on the prevailing traffic movement and traffic levels around the city? And it gives an indication that may be relatively modest in terms of the impact, albeit the income that may be reinvested in other things. And I think one of the challenges we almost set ourselves on the public transport paper earlier on is we recognise there will be a cost, and I think the chair came up with a sort of highly scientific £20 million that we need to we would want to think about. So that's the starting point in parking charges. If you went to a workplace parking levy, which is a charge for the private car park within the city, it gives an indication of what the impact of that may be. That very much focuses on the work that's being done in Nottingham as the sort of the real example in the UK, and actually that goes to show that there's almost a minimal impact in terms of traffic volumes as a result of that type of charge. But nevertheless, it's one of the options that decision makers may wish to consider. We then look at and undertake some sort of projections in terms of pollution-based charging and intelligent charging. Pollution-based clearly offers additional benefits around air quality and pollution-based benefits there, but it does come with a caveat that as vehicles get cleaner over time, there will be less and less of an impact going forward. So therefore, crossing the air pollution and congestion streams, we would need to think, I think, quite carefully about. And then finally, there's the option around some form of intelligent charging, whereby based on the time of day or the prevailing conditions on the network, there may well be a charge with an associated impact on that. So in a sense, the paper is a thought piece that says there's really more work to do around this. Sequencing and phasing is important, and I think, and finally, equality issues will be particularly important within a Greater Cambridge context, whereby an awful lot of people are relying on their motor vehicle to come into the city, and you need to balance that with the impacts and the alternatives that they've got. So I'll probably pause there, Chair, and allow the discussion to take place.
Yes, again, just before we move to the Assembly members, Councillor Bates, no, nothing. Okay, very interesting. Yes, I'm sure we know what we're talking about. Councillor Williams, over to you then.
Not surprising. First of all, I'll say I welcome this paper. It's been a long time getting here. We should have had this much earlier. And I particularly welcome paragraph 6.11, where we do acknowledge that some of the funds that are generated can be used for revenue that we can use to borrow against. And so we can actually start doing things ahead of the actual revenue streams that those things bring about. One thing I would ask though is that a plea for those in South Cambs who don't have or never will have good public transport access direct to the city. The many villages the 106 villages I think in South Cambs, not all of them are going to have a regular 10-minute bus service to the centre of the city or to their place of work. So it's really important that we have park and rides, because I think park and rides will provide a good way of those people being able to use their cars to the outskirts of the city and then pick up a frequent bus to either the city centre or their place of work, and that those park and rides have to be free. So I do hope that there is a commitment that the park and rides will continue to be free and we will have more of them. Thank you.
Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. Go back to that. We can always say that things should have been here earlier, etc., etc. But I think we just have to deal with. We are where we are, and let's go with what we've got rather than what we wish we'd had 6 months, 12 months ago. And you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you with the rest of what you said. And it's that chicken and egg, and it's about the public transport. I was, probably still am, one of those that was wholly opposed to the original proposals for congestion charging, purely on the basis of the numbers of people that work in Cambridge, cannot possibly afford to live in Cambridge and have been effectively forced to move out. They have no decent public transport system that will get them into work. Therefore, they use their cars if they're far enough. If they're close enough, they will probably cycle, but in the main, it will be the use of cars. And I long felt that all we were going to be doing then was penalising people for coming into the city to work, most likely, although not exclusively, on relatively or actual low incomes. So I've always thought that, that was an absolute no, which is why I'm quite pleased with this report. It's looking at it in less of a sort of that blanket way, that there are different methods, and it will be less punitive on the sort of people that I've described. But unless and until there is a decent sort of linked public transport system, we ain't getting people out of their cars. And it's, I still find it hard that we somehow charge them and punish them for it.
Indeed. Councillor Vick.
I was going to make the same comment as Councillor Williams about the progress, because it's the same as the first report on our agenda, really. We've asked to comment on the progress, and I think it is a pity we haven't picked this up earlier, but I'm very pleased that we are now doing so. I think saying that it's good that we're talking about it, I think we should talk about what actually is in here rather than just talking about it as a big whole. I think that I have two sort of points of view that I would like to sort of enter into that debate. One is that I have a reservation about trying to reduce overall traffic with a pollution tax. The powers that exist for us to even contemplate a pollution tax are not there to reduce overall traffic. They're there to incentivise the substitution of clean vehicles for dirty vehicles. And obviously that's a very important objective for us to have. But it'll only make a significant impact if that includes cars. It only makes a significant on congestion if that does include cars. And it's that approach that I think there is a very important dimension that we must consider on the grounds of social equity and fairness. And that is that what it effectively does applied to private car transport, it benefits the people who can afford to go and replace their cars with new models, and disadvantages those people who are driving older vehicles and can't. And I think that is a very, very substantial hurdle to cross in contemplating applying pollution tax to private vehicles. I do think it would be a good idea to consider using the powers for pollution taxes if they were targeted to commercial vehicles and buses, which are two classes and the ones that are most commonly talked about with this power, because you are there talking about organisations that are businesses, and they are sometimes quite big businesses, and they frequently have choices about the vehicles they deploy in particular places within their fleets, and they also have a much more regular approach to vehicle replacement than perhaps any private individual doesn't. And so I think that's an important angle in this whole discussion. The other point that I'd like to enter into the debate is that is a reservation. It depends what we mean about the suggested idea of a phased builder of this sort of policy line. I mean, I awfully don't want this to be like kicking the can down the road, and just because all that we're talking about here is quite tough decisions, and what I think we really need to sanity check ourselves every step of the way, because I think this is at the heart of what our strategy really has to be about, is that we aren't just fending off decisions because they're difficult to take and hope that our successors are the ones to do so. I think that there is a practical problem. That if you take the idea of intelligent charging as an approach in itself, it is actually a complete solution to most of the objectives we're talking about here. And if that is the one that is left to the end, it would then be in the position of sitting on top of earlier measures in a way which would seem to many as if it was creating a sort of double or a triple penalty for people who may be parking as well and driving a dirty vehicle as well, and then learn that there's another charge to pay on top of that. And it's three aspects of the same behaviour. And I'm just wondering that if that's the intended accumulation of measures, whether it's actually going to be a self-defeating accumulation of measures, because it's going to be seen to be extremely unfair, given that the intelligent charging could be a complete solution in place of the others. So I really would like some assurance that if we do consider this progressive approach, that we consider the whole trajectory right up front, so that we know what we intend to do, and it is quite transparent what we intend to do at different points of the trajectory, and that we've mapped it out before we start, so that and we do it in a way which doesn't defeat ourselves halfway along the line by contradicting ourselves or triple punishing people, because punishment at the end of the day is not what this is about. It's about behaviour change and the delivery of something better.
I'll come to you in a minute, but first of all I have Councillor Topping.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things that people have talked about in recent years is the inequalities that exist in and around Cambridge as a city. And one of the things that I would not like to see is the proposal described as intelligent charging exacerbate that inequality. And my concern would be that those proposals would inflict most cost on those people who cannot afford to live in Cambridge, but whose work compels them to travel into Cambridge. But you know, we will see how this goes. But one of the things that I would like us to be pretty clear on is that, you know, Cambridge, Greater Cambridge, has huge ambitions, and that is rightly so, given the intellectual drive and energy of this place. But we have to recognise that Cambridge has about 110,000 people. South Cambridgeshire, I think, about 130. And it is questionable whether intelligent charging, congestion charging, can be made to pay on those sorts of numbers when you compare them with major metropolitan conurbations, obviously like London. On pollution charging, I think that if you are trying to compel people to do something which, and I recognise the point about behavioural change, pollution charging has a resonance that people will, I think, buy into. So I recognise that it's not a complete solution and it has its own issues, but pollution charging might be the way to convince people that something has to be done, and so I would particularly support that. On park and rides, well, jury's out. I would question if we're not charging for park and rides, and I'm very pleased we're not charging for park and rides, but it does cut off an income stream. So I don't have an answer to that. I'm just throwing that into the mix. Thank you.
Right then. And then Joe Sainsbury.
Thank you. I have 2 points to make. We've done it short. 2 points to make on this. There is a statement 6.18 and 19 talking about physical demand interventions. My view on that would be that we should caution against doing too much work on that. Firstly, because it is likely to change traffic distribution, likely perhaps to skew the analysis that you're doing for the public transport, and secondly, that there could be a board of work that therefore needs to be rectified in the future. So whilst I understand that the costing and the charging side of it is perhaps difficult from an equality perspective, in the longer term that might be the better solution. The other point that I would make, both with this and agenda item 8, really picking up on Helen's point previously, is a clear programme about short, medium and long-term studies and therefore implementation would be welcomed in terms of seeing this really actually progressing and understanding what timescales would be, and therefore seeing some potential impact relatively early.
Thank you very much. Helen, yes, now.
I've got two disconnected points. The first one is around section 8, which talks about equality and fairness. And I think, but this is genuinely a question, implies that there has been some work done that we haven't seen yet. And I guess my question would be, could we see that early work? Because it could be that the early work on equality and fairness suggests that some things are just not going to be possible, and it'd be better to see that sooner rather than later. My second point is around the section on intelligent charging, and this question of whether we'd have an inner and an outer zone and charge only for one or the other. And it seems to me that the sort of intelligent approach to intelligent charging would probably be thinking about where are the biggest changes and biggest problems likely to arise, and they seem to me to be in the outer part of Cambridge, particularly around the biomedical campus. So it's not obvious to me why an intelligent charge that just concentrated on the very as centre of the city would make very much a difference. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Massey? Yeah.
What I haven't seen in this report yet is any discussion about school traffic, which I know counts for about 15% during school time, percentage of traffic during peak hours. Now, one option in order to address this would be to ask the private schools to put into their contract that you are not allowed to pick up or drop off from that school, and instead you ask the question, which park and ride would you like to collect your children from, and we will bus that child to and from. And they could charge that and be able to cover their costs that way, and we'd go somewhat towards it. In addition to that, to put no pick up and drop off zone around each school would benefit all the schools across Cambridge and make children safer, but also reduce the traffic during those school terms by 15%, which is one of the targets.
Right then, potentially quite controversial there.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right then, okay, well I'll just say one or two things, because two of my refrains have been picked up by other members, so I'll just endorse them. One is that Cambridge and South Cambridge don't really have the critical mass to make a congestion charge scheme work, so over to officers to address that. And then the lack of a universally accessible public transport network, and the whole chicken and egg thing, which just touches on the point that Councillor Williams repeatedly makes, that if one were to have confidence in an income stream arising from one of these suggestions, then one could borrow and already start some of the public transport improvements that might sweeten this pill. And I'd also like to draw attention to the minutes of our previous meeting, because I thought there were two points that I thought were particularly well made. One was that Councillor Cuffley referred to the position adopted by the previous South Cambridge District Council, recording its opposition in principle to the congestion charging scheme because of the relatively unfair effect on residents of South Cambridgeshire. And that led Andy Williams to ask officers if we could come up with any way of allowing council members to negotiate their way through this obvious and very difficult impasse. And then Councillor Chamberlain referred to the FIA study, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, sorry about my pronunciation, on demand management, and he highlighted a number of relevant points which that very recently published study had made, which were to explore all other options for improving mobility before considering road charging, understand the rationale and scope of a charging scheme, estimate the impact on a range of scenarios including congestion, accidents, energy consumption, carbon footprint, air quality and modal split, target options for income redistribution and to make maximum use of technology available, and to undertake a market-oriented rather than politically driven approach to designing the scheme. And that was the result of an international piece of work reviewing all the schemes that had been implemented up to there, or at least attempted to be implemented, because some of them hadn't worked. And I thought that paper gave some very good pointers. So, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I read the document as well. I thought it was an awful lot of sense in it. So, just picking up on the points that have been raised. Park and ride, I think the same answer I gave to sort of Christopher early on, in terms of that's part of the sort of public transport mix. We just need to flesh that out. I think the issue around charging of park and ride needs to form part of the wider conversation around what would you charge for and what would people get as a result. And so it is very much looking at any form of charging in the context of link to public transport or other improvements. Current legislation for any form of congestion charging, for example, requires the money to be spent on local transport interventions. In any case, Councillor Price again, public transport system, and I think probably what's not maybe come out in the report here is to say there has to be an alternative in place before you can do this. And that isn't just good housekeeping, this isn't going to work. All the evidence we've got today, this is not going to work if there's not something people can go to. Now that might be increased and enhanced over time, particularly because if you can imagine just doubling the size of the bus network in the prevailing traffic conditions, you're sensing the challenge with that. So there may well be a development over time, but there has to be a real alternative for anything of this nature to come forward. In part links with the idea of a sequencing or a programme of interventions. It is about saying, I think, signalling this is what a programme would look like going forward. This is both in terms of, I think, of Judge Sainsbury's point of this is what studies we will need to do, because this is not something that you want to undertake in a dark room. Members need to be cognizant that this is happening, and these are the sort of this is the outputs of both of the studies, but also this is what any delivery programme might look like. Just sat in my seat, to do some of this stuff will take 3 years if we agree today. So there's just a delivery element, let alone how are we also doing public transport and what's that interrelationship in terms of sequencing and phasing. And that will require an awful lot of consideration by decision makers as to what that looks like. In terms of Councillor Topping's point, and again reiterated I think about the chair, size and scale needs to be appropriate to the area that you're considering. Both in terms of the geography, is it a tighter city cordon, is it a wider Greater Cambridge, what are the charging rates, what are the level of exemption. You can predict the impact on traffic rates and the impact on income and the impact on movement of public transport. What we need to do is reflect that to a Greater Cambridge context. In a nutshell, in London, it was £400 million investment in bus services for what broadly equated at the start to about £400 million of income from a congestion charge. What we would need to do is to understand what the impact would be, and actually what would that deliver. Because if the 20 million is right and that delivers the system that you want, then that needs to be part of the sort of charging element to say, well, do we get near it or don't we? And that's what decision makers will rightly want me and officers to bring to them. Parking ranking stream. I think Helen's point absolutely well made in terms of the level of impact. It's picking the geography. I think that does relate to an equity issue in terms of almost people who are driving in and imposing their traffic on others, making sure you get that balance right. And that's something, again, that we would want to think about and explore. But equally, you can pick a very tight cordon of 3 streets that has minimal impact and raises nothing, so therefore, why are you doing it? And I don't say that in jest. There have been other areas that have looked at that. I think the issue of school traffic and transport, I think the Chair mentioned that's the element of the challenging element of it. I think from a practitioner's point of view, it's about deliverability and what benefit would it raise. And so it's being sure that if we had any solution on that basis, it is self-enforceable or enforceable on minimum efforts, because all enforcement has a cost if you're not careful, and that it would genuinely deliver the behaviour change that we want, because otherwise we're simply overcomplicating potentially by picking on one group rather than a wider group. But you're right, we need to explore this from sort of more angles. Critical mass, I hope I've picked up on, Chair. I think the chicken and egg very much is saying, if we clearly understand what the public transport network is, and we understand what that would cost, you could start spending money now on, as long as we're clear that there's an income stream that will come along. Not might come along, will come along. That may well deliver to link it with a delivery time frame, where I say I need 3 years anyway, and so you can see how you could form a programme whereby people could understand that a key element of delivering anything like this is the level of understanding, and this goes far beyond consultation. This is really getting down into individual scenarios, persona workings, so that people really understand the impact on them, and that takes a deal of time and shouldn't be underestimated. So this would all form part of a wider plan should decision makers decide to take this forward. Chair.
Right, members, I know we're all treading on eggshells on this one, but the big conversation told us that much better public transport would be a very, very significant factor in encouraging modal shift. And we're aware that much better public transport would require us to make the roads, the road space available for the buses to run more smoothly. And so somehow we're going to have to square that circle. And my impression is that feelings around the table are in general that this work should proceed. If it's going to take you 3 years, then we would like you to get cracking. I think that's the message. Is that right, members? Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for that discussion. That was entertaining and edifying. Right, that takes us to Greenway.